One of the overused myths relating to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the following. The threat to Israel's continued guaranteed existence is an exaggeration. Israel is by far the most powerful superpower, both militarily and technologically, in the Middle East. That Israel's existence is guaranteed is very basically a myth, and is a myth until this very day, as Israel faces daily existential threats to its survival. The threat to drive all the Jews into the sea, which began with the War of Independence, known as Al-Akba in the Arab world, the catastrophe, has continued ever since. Our myth-busting project will attempt to show that only through Israel's wars of survival, 1948, 1967, and 1973, has Israel managed to survive through the dangers of the last 73 years. On the 29th November 1947, the United Nations voted on the partition of Palestine. Resolution 181, by a vote of 33 in favor and 13 against, the UN voted to create an independent Jewish state and an independent Arab state in what was previously the British Mandate of Palestine. Resolution 181 brought into being the Jewish state of Israel, which would be formally declared on the 14th of May 1948. In the Arab world, it became known as Al-Nakba, the catastrophe. It was clear that the outcome of the vote would lead directly to war. The civil unrest which had forced Great Britain to give up the mandate to the UN would now turn into full-scale war. David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Yishuv, as the Jewish population of Palestine was known at the time, described the onset of war as follows. The infant nation was in a life and death struggle against 7 better equipped, numerically superior, British trained and in some cases led Arab armies invading its meager territory from every side. With inadequate weapons, farm implements, their bare hands and indomitable spirit, the Israelis sent the enemy reeling. Ben-Gurion and his high command were aware of the poor state of readiness of the Arab armies, but they knew that casualties would be extremely high on the Israeli side. They were confident that they would overcome the invading Arab armies because they were aware of the deep divisions between the Arab states, who were divided politically, economically, and socially, and held very widely divergent opinions on the Palestine question. For example, Syria wanted to access the finger of the Eastern Galilee, thus ensuring that the Jordan River sources remained under her control. Egypt was more concerned about the evacuation of British bases in the Suez Canal. The Lebanese did not take participation in the war very seriously because of the country's economic weakness. Finally, Saudi Arabia did not have a common frontier with Palestine and was not interested in military intervention. However, the most directly concerned was Transjordan. King Abdullah considered the Jordanian throne a springboard for a great Hashemite kingdom, including Palestine. Even before the Declaration of Independence, 3 crucial operations had begun by the Israelis. A. Operation Balak, from March the 31st to August the 12th, the aerial transport of arms acquisitions from Czechoslovakia. B. Operation Nachshon, from April the 4th to April the 20th, the Haganah's clearance of Arab forces blocking the road to Jerusalem, which was under siege. And C. Operation Harel, related to that, from April the 15th to April the 21st, the Haganah clearance of Arab forces northeast of the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem road. The opening of the roads was absolutely critical at this stage. On the morning of the 15th of May 1948, Israel was faced by the combined forces of the armies of the following countries, massed on its borders: Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. The initial strength of the Israeli forces until the first armistice was implemented was 29,677. Thus, perhaps Ben-Gurion's statement was not so far-fetched. The widely held belief amongst most historians was that the Arab armies massed on the sides of the fledgling state were poorly trained and not very well armed. The numbers were not overwhelming, and a large proportion of the Iraqi, Syria, and Lebanese soldiers were volunteers. Ben-Gurion, Yigal Yadin, his chief of staff, and other senior officers believed that if during phase 1 of the war, which was the crucial period during which the meager number of the newly formed Tzva Haganah Israel, the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, could hold back the vastly superior attacking armies until the newly acquired armaments and trained soldiers could reach the various fronts, the newly established state would survive. However, the priority of the fledgling Israeli army was the immediate break of the siege of Jerusalem, and a new road had to be built through the rocky terrain. The morning after the Declaration of Independence by David Ben-Gurion, Tel Aviv was bombed by Egyptian bombers. Israel had yet to acquire its air force from the discarded Second World War Czechoslovakian planes, which were still being flown in by Jewish American volunteers. The first truce took place between the 11th of June 1948 and the 8th of July, and allowed both the Jews and the Arabs to improve their positions. Neither side respected the truce, which was due to last 28 days, and was designed to enforce an arms embargo which would be particularly detrimental to the Jews who desperately needed the arms which had been bought from Czechoslovakia with the money raised in the USA by Golda Meir. She had been sent to the USA to raise $5 million, and in fact raised more than $50 million. The major operations of the first phase of the war were the following: Operation Nachshon, the Battle of Mishmar HaEmek, Operation Har El, Operation Biur Chametz for the capture of Haifa, Operation Yiftach, the capture of Tzfat, and Operation Gidon, the capture of Beit Sha'an. During the first truce, which lasted from the 11th of June to the 8th of July, the IDF improved its reinforcements substantially. As has been said, the initial strength was 29,677. By the 4th of June, the army had increased its numbers to 40,825. By the 17th of July, it was 63,586, and finally on the 7th of October, by 88,033. The second phase of fighting took place between the 8th and the 18th of July 1948. During this phase of 10 days of heavy fighting, the Haganah managed to open a lifeline to a number of kibbutzim in the south. And before the second truce was introduced, the Israelis carried out Operation Dani, which was capture of the Arab cities of Lida and Ramla. The capture of Lida was under the command of Moshe Dayan and Yitzhak Rabin. The forced evacuation of the civilian population has caused ongoing controversy. The second truce was introduced on the 18th of July and lasted until the 15th of October. The plan included ideas such as making Jerusalem an international city, Haifa a free port, and the right of Arab citizens who had fled to return to their homes. The third phase of fighting continued from the 15th of October until the 10th of March 1949. Although the Arabs did not recognize the final truce, Israeli forces swept through the Upper Galilee, and more than 50,000 Palestinian refugees fled into Lebanon. By the end of the month, the IDF had captured the whole of the Galilee and even advanced into southern Lebanon as far as the Litani River. Various skirmishes continued, and the final armistice, which became known as the Green Line and remained in place until the Six-Day War of 1967. The casualties of the war were high on both sides. Israel lost 6,373 people, about 1% of its population at the time. About 4,000 were soldiers, and the rest were civilians. About 2,000 were Holocaust survivors. The exact number of Arab casualties is not known. By the end of the war, Israel had increased in size from 45% to 77% of the land promised in the UN partition. Many historians, and I include myself in this group, are of the opinion that the War of Independence has never ended and continues until today. And Israel's guaranteed survival is always in doubt and dependent on the strength militarily and technologically.